So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War and to another battle replay that was actually played on a stream recently, so some of you may have actually seen this one before, but for those of you that didn't, this is going to be a battle around a lake, and I believe this map is called TAUR FAROTH. I mean, in terms of composition, I suppose you could look at it as being fairly similar to Lake Evendim over in Reforged. However, the main differences are that the deployment zones encompass the entirety of the lake rather than focusing on one side. Albeit on this occasion, this map will actually be played with the vast majority of the action taking place on one side of the lake, with some flanking forces also skirmishing with one another over on the other side. So it is going to be fairly similar to one of those matches, to be honest with you. But that's just how the cards fell, really, because both sides, I think especially the red team on this occasion, were sort of more heavily invested in stuff like their cavalry and so forth, and had smaller forces. So they wanted to make the battlefield as small as possible with opportunities to use them if they could. And that also did impact the army composition that I chose, and I would imagine the other players chose as well, considering we didn't actually know what kind of map we were getting into. But as a map, I mean, this one is pretty decent, I have to say. You can see here, obviously, the lake, a waterfall heading down into a deep gorge. You can see that it is obviously low tide, because you can pass across the fords over here, but this is a very defensive position. For cavalry-heavy armies like Feanor, who are going to be on the red team today, traversing an area like this might be difficult if you've gone heavy into your cavalry, especially against reasonably tanky factions and numerous factions as well, like Angband. But I am going to be on the forces of evil today, fighting alongside Tundra's Fox and King of Isengard Artorius over here, with 2 Angband armies and 1 Dominion of Tol and Gaurhoth army. So we'll start off with Tundra's Fox, seeing as we're right here, and he's going to be playing as one of the 2 Angband armies alongside myself. He's gone for a full unit of Ironshot Arbalists. Obviously, in terms of range support, Angband are somewhat more limited than Gaurhoth are, but the crossbows, obviously, we know how powerful crossbows can be if they get into the right position, and as it stands at the moment, Angband are the only faction in the game to have them, although I would imagine when the dwarves do get added, that will certainly change. I would imagine that they would have access to such things as well. But for now, Angband exclusive. Some Wretches of Angband, so obviously this is the lowest tier infantry unit that Angband can field. Very cheap, very numerous, obviously spears as well, which, considering the fact we were facing off against 2 Feanor armies, was always going to be a real draw to bringing the Wretches. Just in general, they offer a little bit more of a numbers approach for Angband as well, considering the fact that we really don't want to be skirmished with some of our stronger units. Back here we can see some Ironshod Legionnaires, so the sword and board variant that of basic infantry that Angband have. Decent armour, especially in comparison to Gaurhoth's offerings in this tier, and overall they should form a decent core to our line. Obviously they're going to be, the quality is not going to be there in comparison to Feanor and Doriath, who we're facing off against. However, in terms of numbers, they will offer the support around some of our more important units that we will need. Back here we have the Bulldogs of Angband, so this is the bodyguard tier unit, a very important unit that Angband have. Obviously this is just a placeholder model for now, while they try and make the model with the severed heads work in the game without causing stability issues. The Bulldogs are very important because they're very strong in melee. They obviously have multiple HP. They also buff the morale of nearby units to the point where it's very difficult to actually break Angband. Without that morale buff from the Bulldogs, Angband's main line can be a little bit more fragile, especially in comparison to the Elves. If you're talking about morale attrition, the Orcs will always lose before the Elves if you don't have proper support in place, and the Bulldogs are that proper support. So using our bodyguard units is going to be important, both for how good they are in melee and for their importance in keeping the rest of our units in line. A half unit of Ironshot Arbalists, so detachment. Obviously detachment's half price, but also you get half the men in them. This can still be useful for a unit like this. It gives us a little bit more of range support when it comes to our Ironshot Arbalists. See over here the Valoralkar, the Balrogs, and the Trollguard of Gothmog. These big monstrous units, obviously for Angband, are a very important part of how they go about their business. Lots of damage can be dealt very, very quickly, but you do need the support of some of their more basic units in and around them. A couple of units of Wolf Riders of Angband. Generally speaking, cavalry like this, they may be Caragor riders, but excuse me, don't let that fool you. The superior wargs do belong to Tol and Gaurhoth. They can field more of them, and obviously they have the high tier bodyguards as well. But reasonably heavy riders, and at counteracting the Feanor cavalry, a unit like this is still going to be very useful if used correctly. Ironshod Ravagers, the basic shock infantry that Angband have available to them, so obviously those big Bardiche style axes they have, armour piercing damage, still decent armour as well on the basic Ironshod units, as with all of them, but obviously the lack of a shield does mean that in particular the Elven Arrows are going to be pretty damaging to a unit like this if they can be isolated and shot at. Further down over here, down the river slightly more, we have the Uroloki. So obviously this, we didn't actually bring any artillery today, but the Uroloki can form sort of an artillery monstrous cavalry hybrid. It's a very unique kind of unit that Angband have available to them. And on this occasion, trying to grill some of those higher tier units, trying to do the damage and then using them as a battering ram in melee makes them a very multifaceted unit. Obviously, probably the most iconic unit of Angband at the moment, to be honest with you, just because of its look and how it actually performs in terms of a mechanical sense. Another unit of Arbalists, so I can tell from this that Tundra's already gone for a little bit more in terms of support than I have. More Ravagers and more Legionnaires, and another unit of Wretches over here, so you can see there is actually another way up over here, preparing for an assault perhaps from the Feanor army across the river. In the middle, we have King of Isengard Artorias playing as the Gaurhoth army, so in comparison to Angband, of course, lighter armour overall, but they do have more supporting units, and also they have a decent core of cheap, unbreakable units, which in comparison with the more heavily armoured units of Angband sort of covers all the bases when it comes to staying power of basic units for the two of them, so interplay is going to be important here. Scarahai Longfangs, which I believe are the non-armor piercing variant of javelins that they have at the lower end. I believe the trappers are the armor piercing version, but a lot of Longfangs here. Armor piercing is not necessarily required for these javelins to do their work, and certainly when it comes to Artorias, he's definitely going to be the supporting army to both myself and Tundra's Fox, who is going to be playing as Angband. Hishtbuk-Kraz Howlers, this is what I was talking about, obviously a reasonably fragile unit, lightly armoured. Their melee defense is not terrible for a unit that costs as low as they do, and they do decent damage as well in that regard, but in comparison to the units that they're going to be facing off against, the quality just isn't there. Their main benefit really to bringing this unit is the fact that they have they are unbreakable. You know, locked morale, so it means on the front line, whereas Angband, they don't have a unit like this at the lower end, and their lower tier units can be easy to break without support around them. The Howlers will just sit there in melee quite happily until they die, which, to be fair, they will do if you don't have like good units around them, because alone they won't be able to do the heavy lifting, but they can definitely be a really useful tool on the front line to just help with that slow attrition-y grind that the orcs can force enemies into. A very useful unit, but obviously as well, something else they have against them, light armour, unshielded, arrows are going to rip them to pieces. A lot of wargs, we've got I think 2 units of the Thrangshik Wolfborn, so that's the highest tier of cavalry that they can muster. Probably the only unit in the game really that has a patch on the highest tier Feanor cavalry, to be honest with you. A very, very strong unit of wargs, of course. They can be useful like stopping enemy cavalry, which I think was the main purpose behind bringing this many wargs, because of all the Feanor armies we were facing off against. But also, they can be used aggressively as well if need be. Laugskaraz Zagulaklav, which are the light warg riders. They don't have a shield, reasonably lightly armoured. You know, they are cheap, however, so in terms of numbers, on a warg back, they should be quite useful as well. We've got the Hishtbuk-Kraz Zagulaklav, which are the mounted javelin riders. Again, another useful unit, I must say. So he's gone for 2 units of the Thrangshik and then the cheaper 2 wargs around them. There are also the Gijak Skaraz wargs as well, which are more similar in terms of style to the Wolf Riders from Angband we've already seen. Another really useful supporting unit are going to be the Hishtbuk-Kraz Ash Priests, because of how devastating they can be with their fiery projectiles, their fiery sorceries, but also they're very strong in melee. 3 hit points and that big axe. They do have a very small unit, of course, in the grand scheme of things, but very, very deadly 1-to-1. You really need to try and overwhelm them most of the time. The elves do have the ability to go toe-to-toe with those units in some cases, but for the most part you want to try and overwhelm them if you can. And then finally some Gijak Skaras chosen, so some heavier spears, unsurprising to see them of course, because of the fact we're facing off against Feanor. And then we have my army. So my army, I decided to go more heavily into the spears and the like as well, so I've gone for some Spear Guard of the Iron Crown, heavier spearmen obviously, very heavily armoured, very heavily shielded, good for dealing with both the archers if they get shot, but also good at zoning out the Feanor cavalry, which I was certainly expecting. Instead of the Ironshod Legionnaires, I've gone for the Ironshod Reavers as well, the slightly more damaging variant. They don't have quite as much staying power in melee because of their lower melee defense. I figured I wanted to go for them just because I didn't feel as though the Legionaries would be able to deal the damage to Doriath or Feanor. They would last longer, but I felt like my allies could cover that, so I wanted to have a little bit more damage in the front line, a little bit more bite, because I felt like if we could do damage quickly, then their manpower could fall apart. I mean, this isn't going to do it all on its own, but all of these little damage boosts do add up. But other than that, they're very similar to the Ironshod Legionnaires, really. A shielded unit of line infantry, only trading in a little bit of melee defense for a little bit of melee offense. I've also gone for the same composition of skirmishes as Tundra's Fox. I've gone for slightly less. 1 unit of Ironshod Arbalist detachment, so the half-strength version, and I've got another full unit around here as well for the support. I've gone for 3 units of Ironshod Halberdiers. I'm a little bit surprised actually that Tundra didn't go for Halberdiers, or at least 1 unit of them. Phalanx units are very hard to come by, and Feanor and Doriath actually don't have any of them really. So if we could force them into a line battle with the Phalanx of the Halberdiers, that would make life very difficult for their cavalry, but also make life very difficult for their infantry, especially with the armour piercing against Feanor's infantry. That was my thinking. Having said that, they are more vulnerable as well to arrows, so in that sense Tundra has got a tankier composition than I have. I've got a detachment of the Guardians of the Iron Crowns. This is the heavier unit of line infantry Angband can bring. They're also armour piercing, which will be again useful against Feanor. The problem is I didn't bring many of them because I was expecting a fairly open map, and I wanted to have a lot of anti-cavalry to prevent the Feanor cavalry from doing the business. And the Guardians of the Iron Crown are really not capable of doing that, but I had enough money left over at the end that I could afford a detachment of them to fill out my army. I've got Uroloki as well, unsurprisingly obviously with their fiery breath. I've also gone for the Bulldogs, a couple of units of the Wretches of Angband, full unit of Arbalest there you see, Trollguard of Gothmog and the Valor Alcar over here, and a couple of units of the Ironshod Ravagers as well, the shock infantry when it comes to the Ironshod line. So more infantry. I don't have any cavalry, but I kind of figured that in particular Gaurhoth would be able to cover that, and I was kind of right. But I don't have as much support in place as my allies, and it does look as though as well that this side of the lake I'm going to have to sort of set up a reasonably tough defensive position immediately, because 2 of the armies are facing me down right from the start. We have Uraki, who's going to be playing as one of the Feanor armies, archers of Amrod, so obviously in terms of skirmish power, reasonably tanky archers with their armour, but also as elven archers as well, they're going to have more expertise than the archers that we have. And just in general, most of our range power is going to come from javelins and crossbows, so once we've finished setting up our army into a position where we feel comfortable advancing, we're going to have to advance quickly, otherwise we're going to be slowly picked apart by all the elven archers. Footmen of Amras with the armour upgrade, I mean this is a very tanky unit of line infantry. They're going to be able to outperform most of what we have. If we had gone more heavily in for something like the Guardians of the Iron Crown, we could maybe trade evenly with them thanks to the AP, or reasonably evenly with them anyway, but as we haven't really got them, when it comes to being up close and personal here, we're going to have to be reliant on our support units and armour piercing rather than skill, because obviously that's where the House of Feanor are going to be really dominant against even Angband and their monsters. Speaking of the monsters, Defenders of Aglon are going to be a good unit to try and get onto the monsters to try and stop them from running through the lines. Obviously heavy swordsmen, shock infantry in general with their higher damage are going to be good at stopping those monsters, and the Defenders of Aglon are one of the finest examples of that in the game at the moment. Stalks of Thargellion, non-armour piercing javelins in much the same way as the Longfangs are, so a very similar thing here, only for the House of Feanor. Again, good supporting unit. Rangers of Hellevorn are the armour piercing variant of course, so again we're going to be seeing javelin to javelin combat I'm sure as the battle trudges on. Over here again, same thing on this side, Aglon, Stalks of Thargellion. Then the cavalry. I mean the cavalry is going to be interesting because this isn't the most wide open map, so the use of the cavalry is going to have to be dealt with very carefully I think from Feanor, especially with the sheer amount of wargs we've got. One wrong move from the cavalry and they could find themselves getting hurt very much. Mounted Company of Carufin, the mounted javelin men. We have the knights as well, really the unit that really stands out in the Feanor roster, the Roqueni Magloro. And then over here some more lancers, the Mounted Company of Caligorm, so the heavy lancers, not quite as powerful as a single unit as the lancers, but obviously there are more of them, and it obviously gives their cavalry a more intimidating look. And another unit of Mounted Company of Carufin. Over here we can see Scouts of Entertainment's army, who is going to be playing as the other Feanor force, Rangers of Hellevorn, Stalks of Thargellion, Footmen of Amras. It's looking like a very similar army to be honest with you, only he has foregone the upgrade on the Defenders of Aglon, which actually I'm kind of glad of, because I think I actually prefer the standard version of the Defenders of Aglon. I mean I do quite like the crimson plates, but I kind of like the chainmail look for these lads. It gives them sort of more of a sort of swordmaster, sort of a sword sainty look almost. Over here, Huntsmen of Thargellion, so they are archers combined with two-handed spears. So I mean if we get our wargs behind the enemy line, this is the kind of unit that normally you'd want to charge into, but with their two-handed spears maybe you'd be less eager to. Another healthy cavalry force, Riders of the Pass, so he's gone for some horse archers as well as the Roqueni Magloro, which are of course his knights. And then he's also got some Mounted Company of Carufin back there for some mounted javies. A couple of units of upgraded Archers of Amrod, and then he's also gone for the Otorn and Maitimo, which are a really, really strong unit of bodyguard and line infantry. And then the final army on display is going to be J Monster, who's playing once again as the Guarded Realm of Doriath. He has got some Sword Host of Region, so obviously this is going to be another really strong unit on the front line. Not quite as tanky as the Footmen of Amras, but by the same token, Doriath are a little bit more damage orientated than armor orientated as Feanor are. So a healthy unit of swordsmen there. Some shield bearers on both sides. He's got some Spear Host of the Girdle, which are javelin spear hybrids just in behind to support. some marksmen of Region, which of course have got the Silverthorn arrows, which will be useful for breaking up an advance. Over here, some Axe Guard and Warriors of Region, so again, the higher damage of the axes, the one-handed axes, and then the massive AP of the two-handed axes. So that's not something that we will have all to ourselves in this battle either. Mounted Company of Region, as you know, melee cavalry like this is going to be very important for them in this battle, I think, because of all of the wargs we have available to us. Something like this is going to be difficult even for some of the better wargs to deal with. And then the Donath and Mablung, obviously this bodyguard tier unit of armor-piercing shock infantry, really, really deadly, especially against the Angband forces, both the monsters and the infantry, so we'll definitely have to be on the lookout for those. But without further ado, let's begin. Now this is only 18k frames, but I can tell you, considering I was in it and I know what happens, that we are probably going to be making liberal use of the half speed option here, because there's a lot going to be happening all across the battlefield here. But seeing the lay of the land here, it was fairly clear what the red team's intention was going to be. So they are going to send over most of their force over to this little village over here, and then they're going to set up a force over on that side of the lake, try and skirmish into the position that I hold, and also to the position that Artorias is going to be striking up. They're not going to go through here. Now Doriath, to be fair, it's not like they're not as cavalry heavy as Feanor, so maybe it wouldn't have been terrible for them to go through here with their damaging infantry, but by the same token, if they were the ones advancing through this cliffy terrain, the crossbows and the monsters would have been awkward, especially the Uraloki. So it's interesting to see that they're going to be sort of focusing almost their entire force really on trying to go through this way. Obviously this also colours what we are going to have to do. We're going to have to go heavy onto this side as well, because if Tundra sends his whole army around there, by the time he's in a position to flank, myself and Artorias will be in a pretty shocking state of disrepair. So most of the action is going to be happening on these shores over here, but there will also be some action happening around the other side, some skirmishing between some flanking forces from both sides, I can say. Here we can see the Mounted Company of Cavalry and the Riders of the Pass from Scouts of Entertainment coming forward. So this is going to colour the early sections of the battle for us in particular. I've got my Iron-Shod Halberdiers. I was initially trying to sort of set up in this full pass, but their cavalry has come forward and effectively stopped me from doing that, so I'm going to have to try and rethink my plan. Mounted Company of Cavalry throwing their javelins in. So initially I was quite worried about this, some of my halberdiers falling, some of those arrows going in, but as time wore on I actually realised that most of the ammunition, most of the arrows in particular, were heading straight into the front of my Spear Guard of the Iron Crown that were in Shield Wall. So I'm much less concerned about that, so I'm immediately going to turn my halberdiers around, of course. Mounted Company of Cavalry over there. But this is a lot of cavalry, and more to the point, it's a lot of ranged cavalry, so it's not even as if I can send my monsters forward and with some spears to ward off like lancers or anything, because if I do that I'm just going to get javelins and arrows directly to the face. So this is going to sort of start the trend of this battle for me of having to be the sponge. So really what I was thinking, and I do have the best army for this to be fair, because I've not gone for really any cavalry, I've gone for a lot of reasonably defensive tanky units from my front line, including a phalanx support with the halberds. Really it's just my monsters and some of my shock infantry that does the damage for me. So for my plan in this battle, immediately I saw what way this battle was going and I was like, okay, if I can set up along here, I'm more than willing to be the punching bag for the enemy team here. Obviously Lancers coming forward. They're going to sort of maybe go towards the wretches. I wasn't too worried about this. I mean, they were going to come forward there, but obviously wargs in close proximity, so looking for an opportunity to use their cavalry. But I was going to come forward, set up a position, and then with the support of Artorias, we could reasonably do a lot of damage, and effectively we would just try and outlast the elves, because this is a lot of cavalry. You know, in terms of infantry numbers, we're obviously going to have the advantage on a normal day, but the fact they've gone fairly heavy in for their cavalry does mean that they're not really going to be having the level of numbers to really be able to keep pace with us in that regard. That was the plan anyway. Mounted Company of Karufin charging. I think Scouts of Entertainment there just got a little bit close. I think he was trying to get in close to maybe use his javelins on the monsters, but the range just wasn't there for them. Javelin cavalry doesn't have the best range, obviously. And they got a few kills on my Wretches of Angband, but it's more than worth the trade there to kill off some of those mounted javelin men. Wretches of Angband are by far and away my most disposable unit on this occasion. So you can see over here, Tundra does have some of his wargs, his wolf riders, all of his wargs actually crossing over to this side, so they're getting ready to make that flanking move. He's also going to send his Uraloki around, which is interesting. It will force a response from the forces of good here when the Uraloki do get around there. So it is going to be interesting, because most of their cavalry at the moment is front and centre. Scouts once again coming back for another bite, and once again he's going to, I don't know whether he's out of ammunition in his Mounted Company of Karufin. He may very well be. They don't have much ammo, but charging into the Wretches of Angband, I mean, yes, they're going to get kills doing this, but the Wretches of Angband are spears at the end of the day, and I don't really care if they die like this, especially if we start making dents in their cavalry force. I mean, they're shaken there already. As every time they charge in, they're taking damage in melee and at range from the Hishtbuk there. By the same token, though, the Hishtbuk are also taking pot shots from the archers of Amrod. So far, this is kind of the kind of battle, to be honest, that the forces of good wanted, and this is why I was getting a little bit concerned. Now it's not just their cavalry in position, it's also their archers, and if we stay here, we're going to take losses that we can't really afford to before the battle is joined. And you can see here, trudging over here, I think my allies wanted me to wait before I moved in, but I mean, like, look at this, like, we're not taking devastating losses here, but we're taking just little losses here and there, which they're going to add up as the battle goes along. And so eventually I do make the decision, like, look, we don't have Tundra's Fox's army over here, but it doesn't really matter if we are. I mean, we can't all go through this reasonably narrow pass, like 3 armies of Angband and Gaurhoth are not going to be able to fit through here. I'm going to move forward, meet the enemy first. I'm always going to be the one to take most of the damage here, just because of how the deployment zones and how the armies have moved. I'm fine with that. We start the attack now, start the ball rolling, and hopefully we can start rolling into the enemy lines, because they don't have as much infantry as us over here. I mean, if anything, my mistake early on here was maybe not attacking soon enough, because now Doriath are arriving, and Doriath have got a lot of infantry at their disposal, a lot of damaging infantry as well. If I'd attacked immediately, with the support of Altorius' wargs, we maybe could have worried Feanor a little bit more, because they've definitely gone for more supporting units like missile cavalry and sort of foot-bound missiles as well. But that is the first sort of... that's what I would say looking back at this now. Having said that, Feanor have also taken a few losses on their cavalry here, and it's not as if Feanor have done anything too devastating to us either. Like, they've killed off a few wargs and a few wretches, but that's pretty much it. You can see Tundra's Fox has got his arbalests over here now, and they're starting to skirmish, firing some crossbows in there, killing off some of the archers of Amrod, as well as some of the mounted company and the riders off the pass. Archers of Amrod starting to fire away here, though, but now you can see this is where I start to mobilise. I'm like, this has gone far enough. Like, look at all these archers teeing off on us. We can't just sit here and wait. Like, my army's going to be really battered and bruised if I wait for all of these units to get into the perfect position to start advancing. I'm going now. Already my Reavers have taken reasonable damage, and they're already not the most survivable unit. Guardians of the Iron Crown moving forward. So this is going to be a fairly messy advance, because, again, like, most of my units were split around this little hamlet over here. But this is at the very least going to force these archers to move backwards. So finally we're not under immediate range pressure from those arrows. Less wargs dying, less wretches dying, monsters also making their presence felt over there. Stalkers of Thargelion. So this obviously is going to be the javelins, so they're trying to set up another line, trying to throw some javelins in on the advance, which they will be able to do, because obviously we're having to go up and over a hill. It's going to slow us down pretty substantially. And the javelins are coming in. There's, just a couple of kills on the Hishtbuk though. I mean, the ranges of Hellethorn ammunition is maybe a little bit more valuable than that, and you can see over here that it's a reasonably broken up line actually. Uraki is actually pulling back, and Scouts of Entertainment isn't with his javelin, so this is going to lead to a bit of a jagged line. So this advance is pretty messy, but the defence from the good team is also equally messy, really. So definitely evens for organisation there. Stalkers of Thargelion getting caught by the Wretches of Angband, so the Wretches obviously are very poor in melee in comparison. The Stalkers of Thargelion are not great either though, and just stopping those javelins from being thrown, getting a little bit of disruption in there as well. Now you can see my Uraloki starting to fire. There's a reasonable blob over here that I'm starting to fire into, so there you can see Stalkers of Thargelion taking very large damage actually, and they're already wavering. And there they go once again, so getting some good damage done on the front line as well. The defenders of Agon are here, and actually this is where things are going to go down to half speed, I think. So a combination of Iron Shod Reavers and my Spear Guard of the Iron Crown in Shield Wall are moving forward. There's actually a bit of a gap over here on this side, which I'm a little bit concerned about, with Doriath reinforcements coming forward. But this is where my Uraloki can really shine. So far they've only really killed off Stalkers of Thargelion, but they've managed to rout them off, so that's some support gone. My Valor Aukar are coming in, my Troll Guard of Gothmog are coming in, so with how split the enemy line is, I don't think the enemies were expecting us to go this heavily in, which is why I decided to commit so heavily with my monsters even. I've also got my Iron Shod Ravagers in here as well, and they're up against a good target. To be honest with you, I just advanced with what I had where I had, but it's kind of good fortune that my Ravagers are going up against upgraded Footmen of Amras, to be honest with you, because this is where they're going to be most efficient. They're taking a few of these Silverthorn arrows, but it's not the end of the world, especially with the support coming in from my allies, Trollguard of Gothmog as well. This is going to be a real problem for the Feanor infantry on the front line. They're definitely going to need some reinforcements. Speaking of which, though, there are defenders of Aglon over on this far side as well, which is going to be another problem. Just in behind the lines, you can see these wargs made it a fair distance, actually, these Laugskras, as they sort of came in, as well as the Hishbukras, and doing a decent amount of damage here, Artorius, with his cavalry, but unfortunately, he doesn't really have enough of his cavalry over here to have like a decisive victory, and yeah, I mean, ultimately he's going to lose this, but at the very least, this cavalry is sort of being drawn off from the front line, and it's going to give the red team a little bit more to think about. I also committed my Valor Alcar in here, and you can see that in order to hold against this large attack that's coming in, the enemy have had to blob up, really, and this is allowing my Uroloki to get really good shots. So the losses that I received, really, from the arrow fire early on are definitely being paid back now by my Uroloki. However, in order to sort of stop my Uroloki from being engaged in melee, I had no choice but to commit my Balrogs against units which I would really rather they not be up against all on their lonesome, especially stuff like Warriors of Region. Like, if I leave my Balrogs unsupported there for too long, they will fall away without doing the devastating damage that they are known for. But having said that, I don't have much of a choice, really. I'm going to need support from Tundra's Ironshod Legionnaires to really get the most out of this. But my Uroloki are really teeing off on this side. Very happy with their performance so far. Also on the front line, my Halberdiers are now finally arriving in phalanx formation. That should really help shore things up. They are taking a few shots from the missiles, but now, with that armour-piercing phalanx on the front line, we should be reasonably comfortable with the fact that even if we don't win because of the quality of the red team here on the front line, the red team are not going to be able to just roll through our line and get up close and personal. With my halberds there, it's going to be much more awkward for them to do that. Over here, you can actually see with the Gijak Skaraz chosen, alongside the armour piercing of my Axemen, and now some Hishbukras Howlers as well as the Troll Guard. I mean, this is a lot of units coming in over here. Hishbukras Howlers, my Bulldogs are over here on this side as well. And all of a sudden, over on this flank, things looking pretty grim, actually, for the red team. Red team not looking so good there. Over here, meanwhile, you can see Wolf Riders of Angband heading over here. You can see the Uroloki are also here. But unfortunately, a sort of side effect of Artorius engaging over here with his wargs is the fact that it was then immediately apparent and fairly close by that Tundra also had his flanking force coming over here with his Uroloki and his Wolf Riders. This unfortunately is going to draw the ire of most of the remaining Feanor cavalry, which is still reasonably healthy, to be honest with you. They've mopped up those wargs, and now they're going to be able to come over here. And unfortunately, like, the Wolf Riders are decent, but they're certainly no Thrangshik Wolfborn, and they're definitely not going to be up to the task of facing off against this amount of heavy cavalry from Feanor. The Uroloki may be able to get a few supporting shots in, but ultimately the numbers proposition here is not really a good one. And Uraki in particular, with his very heavy cavalry focus here, is going to be able to do very well there if he's able to control his cavalry reasonably enough. Scouts for Entertainment has his Roqueni over here as well. More spears coming in, so you can see that more and more resources are having to be committed over here, but you can see my Balrogs are isolated. I sent in my Uroloki to try and make the best of this situation. What I wanted to do was go up here with my monsters and just start causing a real mess in behind the lines. And I thought with my Uroloki's mass I'd be able to do that, but unfortunately, for me, the enemy have been able to react very swiftly to that, and even my Uroloki and my Balrogs with their mass, like, there's simply too many Elven infantrymen over here. So the best I can hope for is that my monsters do a decent amount of damage over here in melee while they still live, which isn't going to be much longer, I don't think, considering the amount of damage that Doriath can do in that sort of situation. My Troll Guard over here as well, I committed them early just to try and help shore up the line. Like, because of the messy advance, I felt compelled to do this. There's only 3 of my Troll Guard left at this point, and they're really in and amongst things on this front line. But they've already served their purpose, really. You can see that I do have my Halberds in position now. And I was always, like I said, going to be the punching bag here. Like, I was going to go forward, and hopefully the losses that I take are going to be losses that my allies don't take, and eventually the numbers will be able to do their thing. Defenders of Aglon here are shaken. I mean, the Bulldogs, fear-causing, really, really strong unit of infantry, alongside the unbreakable Hishbukras Howlers. Defenders of Aglon just not going to be able to carve their way through that. Archers of Amrod, I mean, a lot of these archers at this point out of ammunition. Elven archers, very capable in melee, of course, so they're going to be able to help shore things up. Tundra's trolls are doing a little bit better than mine, but mine were also up against sort of more dedicated infantrymen, whereas his primarily up against stuff like rangers and archers. Still good in melee, but no match for trolls. But with the support of Doriath's units over here, that should be that. Meanwhile, over here you can see the overwhelming force coming forward from the Feanor Cavalry. A couple of volleys coming off from the Uraloki, but now they're having to sort of muck in melee. You can see how utterly outnumbered and outclassed the Wolf Riders of Angband are over here. This flanking force probably would have benefited from at least one of the units of Thrangshik Wolfborn from Tol and Gaurhoth. As it is, though, this really was a bit of a bloodbath back here, and so far getting our wargs in behind the enemy lines hasn't really done anything for us, because they've just been smacked back down by the Feanor heavy cavalry, which is a shame. You know, those are losses that we're going to have to take at this point. It's not horrible for us. You know, there's still, you know, we still have enough wargs to the point where we can do something with them, but so far the mounted game has been handily won by Feanor. Over here, meanwhile, back on the front line, you can see that my Balrogs at this point are mostly gone. You know, and that's not surprising at all. I mean, you can see they're in and amongst not only the heavy axemen, but also the bodyguard tier Great Macemen. The Doriath and Mablung are pretty much the ideal unit to be hunting down monsters like this with. And you can actually see over here as well, this flank over here is not looking good for us, because my monsters were really the only thing holding this in place. And Tundra's one unit of Ironshod Legionnaires were broken. I think, you know, there are more reinforcing units back here. I do feel as though, looking back at this, Tundra maybe should have sent in more than one unit of line infantry over here, because things were looking bad for us over here for a long time. Like, my monsters were really the only thing stopping this thing from falling apart. Like, they're still fighting and his line infantry is running. Just one more unit of line infantry may very well have been enough to make something happen there. Laug Skaraz are on the front line. I'm not sure how they got there, to be honest with you, but they're on the front line, and they're undoubtedly going to get butchered by Footmen of Amras and Defenders of Aglon. I think the Otorn and Timo are in there as well. Indeed they are, right here in the centre. But so slowly but surely, stuff like the Ironshod Ravengers and the Ironshod Halberdiers should be sufficient to do a good amount of damage. My Troll Guard here, one of them is still alive, which is fairly surprising when you think about it. He's swinging that big old... That's not really a scimitar, is it? It's more just a shard of metal than anything else. Over here, meanwhile, yeah, this flank over here, I mean, conversely, how we're losing closer towards the lake, but we are winning towards the cliffs. Storks of Thargallion doing some good damage there with their javelins. Into the Ironshod Ravagers from Tundra's Fox. Unit of Scarahai Longfangs out of ammunition, so they're going to be committed to the melee fight, trying to help overwhelm this position. Again, I think now is the time where J-Monster really should be thinking about committing some reserves. Obviously, at half speed, this is obviously a very... It's easy to sort of criticise people for not committing stuff fast enough when it's on half speed. I mean, I'm much the same, really. I'm getting my Arbalists in a bit of a mess if you look at it on half speed. I'm trying to get them into a good position to fire. At this point, my Arbalists are trying to get down over here to try and get into the Shield Bearers of Regin, because now Tundra is doing the same thing as I did, really, committing the Balrogs in. Javelins also coming in, shooting into the Warriors of Regin. So we're trying to do our thing at this point, because so far, this hasn't really gone the way we wanted it to go, in the sense that it's looking more and more like the attrition-y fight is actually going to start favouring them. I mean, we are winning towards the cliff, and in the middle, my Halberdiers at the very least are going to make it so, Halberdiers and Spearguard of the Iron Crown, to be fair, are going to make it so it's a real slog for them to get through. But we're losing on the front line more than we're winning, to be honest. And that's not great for us. Halberdiers there. You can see the Axe Guard of Regin also over there. And that's pretty much the end of things over here. I mean, the Uraloki are still alive, amazingly enough. I mean, they are monsters after all. Like, if you're going to kill the Uraloki like this, you really need to try and get a charge off on them, and Scouts of Entertainment has managed to do that, really, with his Knights. Back over here, see there's still a few scattered remnants of units, but this is key. You know, towards the lake there was enough of a gap over here that Artorius was able to get through with his Thrangshik Wolfborn, and this battered unit of Mounted Company of Regin is going to be consummately dealt with, really, by the strongest wargs that Gaurhoth have at their disposal. That's not going to be great for them. Meanwhile, you can see there fiery projectiles coming in. Is that the Ash Priests, I wonder? No, it's Hishbut Kraz Hunters over there. Not damaging enough to be the Ash Priest, I don't think. No, yeah, it's the Hishbut Kraz. Ironshod Arbalists from Tundra's Fox over here, you can see. With the reinforcements from Doriath also, the out-of-ammunition Scouts of Thargallion. At the very least, the push has been interrupted over here on this side, which is not what we wanted. But with our wargs in behind the lines now, this unit of Thrangshik Wolfborn managing to slip through, and Uraki has been outmaneuvered at this point, and now coming in like a wrecking ball. This is the leg up we needed, to be honest with you, because this will change a slightly losing fight on the front line to potentially a winning fight. Now, J-Monster has done a very good job here of interrupting the full-blooded charge with his Spear Host of the Girdle. Artorius, now that he's in this position, he absolutely needs to make it count. Otherwise, if we lose these 2 units of Thrangship Wolfborn without making an impression on this line, we've lost basically all of our wargs, and we haven't been able to do what we wanted with them, which would be a real disaster. The Javelin wargs have done okay in this fight, but we really need someone coming in with the steel chair, as it were. And that's exactly what Artorius is going to be able to do here. He is going to be able to give the Spear Host of the Girdle the slip, just about. And we are going to be able to charge into the back of this front line over here. And in combination with the Halberdiers and the Line Infantry we still have over there, a nice hammer and anvil strike. And that's going to change the entire complexion of this fight. Because my army was slowly getting battered down at this point. I have been the punching bag, and you know, I've taken a lot of punches at this point. But now, with charges coming in from the Thrangship Wolfborn in the middle of this line, not only are we going to be making slow but sure progress near towards the cliff, we're also going to start winning in the middle. And over here as well, Tundra has now committed forward more units. A lot of these Ironshod Legionnaires are on the verge of breaking, to be honest with you. A lot of that has to do with the massive amount of armour-piercing units that Doriath have down here. But it is necessary. We need more bodies in the way over here so that we're just hanging on, because then we can wrap up the line. The cavalry from Uraki is coming over here now. I mean, outmaneuvered so far, but his cavalry is now over here to try and stop the Thrangship Wolfborn from just doing as it pleases. Thrangship Wolfborn are actually shaken over here. They do stabilise though. Mounted Company of Karufin are over here as well. Some of the reinforcement units that Doriath had over here of Line Infantry, the Axe Guard of Region, probably going to need to be committed at this point to make up for the losses they've taken on the front line. Ironshod Legionnaires there, but in particular the Halberdiers are going to be difficult now. Halberdiers you can sort of overwhelm with numbers when you're fighting from the front, but now less numbers is going to make it significantly more difficult for them. Hishbuk-Raz Howlers fighting alongside them, so unbreakable units to assist with that. More reinforcements coming in from the Scarahai Longfangs as well, but you can see that while we have the numbers now, certainly after those charges, we don't have that high of a quality threshold at this point. Like, a lot of it is just sort of Ironshod units, Hishbuk-Raz, some Scarahai in there. None of it is particularly scary, I would say, other than stuff like the Ash Priests, who are around here somewhere. They sort of blend in. I'm trying to get my Arbalists into a position to shoot along this line to really hammer home the damage that we've already done. In come the Thrangship Wolfborn once again to try and help over here. I mean, over here is definitely where we needed the most help, and at this point, with the range support coming in, with more numbers on the front line, even Doriath's damage might not be enough to dig them out of this hole. And you know, Tundra's Valor Alcar have lasted a lot longer than mine have, but you can see over here that they're in and amongst all of these AP shock troops, which is not really where I would want mine. Spear Guard of the Iron Crown winning, so yeah, you can see at this point numbers becoming a little bit of a concern on the front line. Quantity versus quality indeed, because that is what this is going to come down to now. And you can see that the line here in particular where the Thrangship Wolfborn struck is looking dangerously thin at this point in time. Up here, victory actually seems more possible over here now. Reinforcements coming in from Doriath to try and shore things up over here has actually meant this fight over here has turned around. Even with my Bulldogs over here, that's not going to be sufficient to win this fight. Some Ironshod Ravagers back there as well, which probably need to be committed to the front line somewhere at this point. Another charge coming in from the Thrangship Wolfborn before they're inevitably swamped by Feanor's cavalry, but devastating charges from the Thrangship there, and something we desperately needed. So now, what was trending towards a red team victory is now all of a sudden trending towards a blue team victory, because this front line is now pretty thick with men, or orcs I should say, but also down here they're still doing well because they have a lot of their quality, but you can see there, Ironshod Arbalists, I am managing to shoot up the line to some extent. It's not an ideal angle of fire, but it's better than nothing. And to try and help out our lower quality units on the front line, firing into the best position they have left really. They've still got a lot of damaging units from Doriath, and to be fair, these Ironshod Legionnaires are barely holding on at this point. Doriath's damage in melee has been a real problem for us on the front line throughout this entire battle, because they can counteract our monsters a little bit better than Feanor's more defensive infantry can, and we haven't been able to get into a position to use our support on their strongest point either. It would have been better maybe to have a unit of Javelins down here to try and deal with that. And over here, this was a rout from an important unit, Ironshod Ravagers. They're holding onto the front line. my crossbows are now going to be exposed as well. They were in a good position to be shooting, but now that's much less the case. But you can see over here, it's looking bad at this point for the forces of good, because when your front line starts to fall apart, it's never a good look. And you can see here the Axe Guard of Region. This is usually where the snowball starts to happen. I mean, there's only one unit of Axe Guard really preventing us from just washing in across the enemy. In comes Scouts of Entertainment with his Rogue 20, though. He's going to throw his cavalry in, and this is going to be key here, because we still have some Thrangshik back here, but not much of them. Feanor still have cavalry left, a good amount of cavalry at that. If they can use their cavalry to get behind our lines, like we've already seen the fragility of our morale where our bulldogs are not committed, that could be absolutely vital to their chances. One thing I haven't seen throughout this entire battle has been the Hishbut Kraz Ash Priest. I'm not sure where they've gotten to, but I haven't seen the devastating fiery volleys that they can lay on. Roqueni Magloro charging in here. You can see that now that there's not really a lot of their infantry in the way, they do actually have a fairly clear charge at our infantry. Now the problem with doing that is there is a lot of heavy spears, there's halberds, and there's also axemen, which means if they get bogged down in melee against these units, they're going to lose what cavalry they have remaining to them, which obviously would be a really devastating blow for them. Over here, meanwhile, once again, this fight is turning around again due to the fact that bulldogs are there with sufficient support. The Scarahai Longfangs just acting as a meat shield as the bulldogs slowly but surely do their work. Spear Host of the Girdle at this point are the only things holding on in the centre, but lighter spears like this, who are not dedicated spears either, they're a hybrid unit. If they're your last line of defence in the middle, things are probably going to get pretty grisly for you. Hishbut Kraz coming down here, Thunderous Fox committing his Balrogs in here. Not ideal against all of this shock infantry, but at this point it was needed. I had to throw my Arbalists in here as well just to stop Doriath's advance. We need reinforcements down here desperately before things start to turn around for us over here. Like, it's all well and good us winning in the middle. If we don't hold on across the line, it means we're just sort of tilting the front line from this orientation to being one sort of flat, which wouldn't really net us much in the end. Thunderous Fox is going to come forward with a lot of his reserves and some of his returning units as well. You can see over here, Axe Guard of Region holding on, but Ash Priests are over here. The Ash Priests must have used up their ammunition, I guess. I didn't see them use their ammo, both when I was playing nor when I was in this replay over here. I sincerely hope that Artorias was able to use that ammunition. Well, back over here, Riders of the Pass, hunting down, like the Thrangshik have proven themselves to be a real pain for the blue team at this point, but they have now been pretty much entirely dealt with. So now, the cavalry is theirs to use effectively. But can they use it? Like, there's still halberds, there's still a lot of spears, there's still the crossbows in support. Primarily my crossbows at this point. I think most of Tundra's have used up their ammunition and have just been thrown into the front line to add more meat to the grinder. Don't know what these Hishbut Kraz were doing on the front line. Like, I can understand needing to get more bodies on the front line, but there's really no need for them to be there. And in hindsight, actually, that could prove to be a bit of a problem, because those Hishbut Kraz, with their mobility, could be used to counteract any counter charges from the Feanor forces. And you can see over here now a combination of Scouts' cavalry and Uraki's cavalry. And over here, these Gijak Scaras chosen, fighting on the front line. I mean, the Axe Guard of Region looks like they're going to win that fight over there, but there's simply too many orcs at this point. Like, it's going to have to come down to the cavalry if they're going to make a comeback here. Mounted Company of Kalogorm in there. Hishbut Kraz shaken. Ironshod Ravagers coming in here. Like, this is the problem. Like, down here on the lakeside, it's been so messy. Like, I feel as though we weren't organised enough down here, to be honest with you, looking back at this. Like, I threw my monsters in there early on as sort of a desperation measure to stop them from just rolling through us. And I do feel as though, I think Tundra maybe should have committed more early, while our monsters were still more unified. As it is, like, we really don't. Like, we've been constantly losing down there. Over here, meanwhile, Iraqi and Scouts have managed to charge through the lines with the cavalry, so this is going to be absolutely vital here. Like, over here, where the enemy lines were getting very, very thin on the ground, at this point now they've been able to charge through the infantry we had there, and now they've got cavalry in behind our lines, which is not great for us at all. Roqueni Magloro, even 12 of them, we've seen 12 knights be devastating in the past, and now I think 1 speed is good enough for now. Valor Outcast of the monsters, Hishbut Kraz coming over here to try and stop them. A crossbow volley coming in, but the Roqueni, as these high tier knights manage to weather that storm, and they are going to be able to get a charge into the back of this position over here. So all of a sudden it's a messy fight, which normally the orcs actually want a messy fight. Not in this situation though. If it stayed organised, we had them right where we wanted them really, but now, charging in there, our morale is looking less than ideal. A lot of cavalry coming in over here. The Ironshod Ravagers coming in to try and plug the gap. In sustained melee, they will be able to do the business. And we are chopping down these horsemen, slowly but surely, but those Roqueni Maglor are getting really all up in the business of our infantry over here. And there you can see, Halberdiers, a unit of 66 halberds, break. I'm really surprised those halberds broke in the face of 3 knights, to be honest with you. But they did break, and that was what was giving our front line over here a pretty decent amount of rigidity. Now, all of a sudden, things are turning around. Things are actually getting a little bit out of our control immediately here as this cavalry rushes through this line. So actually, what was a victory for us over here turned into a bit of a boon for them, because they were able to get through a position which was covered by their own infantry. Now they were able to charge through. Ash Priests killing off that general now. So Scouts of Entertainment, while he was able to rout off the halberds, it has ended up costing them in the end. But definitely worthwhile to do, because I mean, very disappointing there for my halberdiers that they routed in the face of that. Over here as well, Doriath continuing to win over here. A fight we've never looked like securing down here is going their way. And you can see now up here in the middle, we are still winning in the middle, to be fair. Like, we have the numbers over here to just sort of roll over what defenders were left over here. But it's going to be vital for us here, in charging into the Ash Priest there with the Mounted Company of Caruthit. It's going to be vital for us here to try and consolidate, because if we stay scattered like we are, they're going to be able to find good charges. So we're actually losing on both flanks now. My Bulldogs, to be fair, will hold on for a long time over here, even against sort of overwhelming numbers like this. But we're losing towards the lake and we're losing towards the cliffs. We're winning in the middle with our infantry, but the cavalry is making life really awkward for us at the moment. Like, my crossbows are not able to get clear shots at them either, and that's massive. Like, that break there, once again, a really healthy unit being broken. And at this point, I really don't have much left, so I can't really save my own units from being charged like that. It has to come down to the support and the reserves, essentially, that we have from my allies. And unfortunately, you know, none of us were really quick enough to react to that. And things are spiralling out of control for us at this point. We'd actually built up a healthy lead, thanks to those Thrangshik charges, but now with a taste of our own medicine, enemy mounted units are making life incredibly difficult for us. And now we have a presence everywhere across the battlefield, but we're winning nowhere. And really decisive cavalry action here from Feanor has turned the battle on its head. Ironshod Legionnaires getting charged again. Very depleted units of cavalry, but at this point in time, every unit on the field pretty much is depleted. Victory for those Region units over there. Wretches of Angband routing off, obviously in the face, not of the Ash Priest, but of the Doriath advance. They were ultimately able to win down there, of course. The Doriath units, I mean, they're going to be going up against Ash Priests here, which the Ash Priests will win that fight. The fact that we still have Ash Priests alive is perhaps quite key, because they're so difficult to bring down. If we can get support in and around those Ash Priests, it could be absolutely vital. Over here, meanwhile, my Arbalists at the very least did return from routing. They don't have the most ammunition left, but supporting these Wretches of Angband to try and kill off this Death Star from Doriath, essentially. Still a lot of these shock infantry units left alive, which goes to show we really didn't overwhelm them to the extent we needed to over on that side. Over here we can see still got some halberdiers fighting, but ultimately that cavalry rolled through our line and devastated what chance we were winning before that cavalry were doing, sort of rolled through our line like that. And ultimately this is going to lead to us losing the line fight, and so we're going to have to be scrambling to try and rally around the Ash Priests and try and win that way now. Because if we can do that, the cavalry charges become less scary. See there, my Spear Guard are routing off. When my higher tier units are routing off, you know it's a problem. Ironshod Legionnaires overwhelming that unit over there. Still my Bulldogs and some of Tundra's Fox's Ravagers are over here doing our thing. But ultimately we are going to lose this fight over here as well. It's a slow process, but yeah, I mean, that's the key here. We're losing in every engagement slowly, except for this one back here, to be fair, with the support of these crossbows, the numbers of the Wretches, and also the inevitable support from the Ash Priests and the Valor Alcar. Still having 3 Valor Alcar is an important important thing as well. Really, really powerful units this. But we need to safeguard their lives for as long as possible. Because really the only thing I have left of my Arbalest, I've consigned myself to losing what remains of my Bulldogs at this point because there's just nothing left of them. The Ironshod Legionnaires break. The battered remains of the Feanor foot army over here as well. Defenders of Agron over there. And there goes my general, finally put to the sword and spear up here. Cavalry at this point for Feanor is battered and bruised, certainly, but it's done its job already. And at this point, I mean, it's really going to come down to, like, if this unit of crossbows still had a decent amount of ammunition left, we would maybe have more of a chance. But I know for a fact that it doesn't, because it was my army. There goes Artorius' general. Warriors of Rhegion. Downhill charge there from the mounted company of Calagor. Wretches will turn around to meet that charge. Still cavalry proving to be the bane of our existence here on the front line. Across come the Ironshod Arbalists as well. Yes, I would very much agree with that because numbers wise it's still relatively even, but most of our numbers at this point are coming from the Wretches of Angband. The Valor Alcar as well have been isolated essentially by the Doriath and the Warriors of Rhegion. The fact that these guys are still alive, especially the Warriors, they were in that frontline fight for a long time. It just goes to show that we didn't organise ourselves properly down there at all. Having said that, across the rest of the line we did, and it was just decisive cavalry action from Iraqi and scouts that was able to do it, and also morale. I think here, this fight does go to show that if you don't have the support in place, Angband will break, as any orcs will. And that depleted unit of knights was able to blow a hole in our line by routing off a decently healthy unit of halberdiers, which were holding back some elite units at that point, and were allowing us essentially to work up the Feanor line. In the end though, that charge was decisive. Also Iraqi was charging all over the place with his more numerous cavalry and doing all sorts of damage to us. And what was a steadily winning fight for us turned into a rapid turnaround in favour of the elves. And yeah, at this point obviously you can see really nothing but wretches left. I got charged with what was left of my Arbalest. They were out of ammunition anyway. I was just trying to sort of add some numbers to the front line, but they got charged, routed off immediately, and this time they will not be coming back to the party. The wretches continuing to try and do their thing. Victory seems certain, which is a pretty optimistic assessment of their chances, I would think, especially now they're getting overrun by some of these Feanor infantry units. Well, I say infantry, a lot of it is archers that are out of ammunition, but there you can see routing from the wretches. Some would even say that I don't have an army left. Tundra's wretches being brought down as well. That's his general, who was, I think he was actually one of the Valor Alcar, but he died, and there go the wretches, and that was the only thing keeping them from routing, of course. And then over here, this is the final stand of our units. Artorius has 3 Ash Priests left alive, which is all that remains of our army, but I mean, when you look at what's left for the enemy as well, not an awful lot. I mean, you can see here, yeah, within 2% the differential here, but it is going to be a win for the blue team. It's interesting as well, because normally, like I always say that normally it's going to be sort of messier fights that favour the orcs, but in this case it wasn't actually the case. Like, if we had managed to maintain cohesion along that line, we would have won that fight, but the cavalry made it messy, and at that point in time that's exactly what Feanor needed, and in the end we paid very dearly for that. And the loss is ours, so the forces of good going to win here. Big swings coming in from those Ash Priest axes, getting some good kills there, but ultimately there's no chance for them. And there we go. A good fight though, definitely. Very good fight. 1 Ash Priest left alive. What's he trying to do? Well, he's dead now anyway. So there we go. A loss. Really brutal line fight. You can see here, the line fight pretty much remained in the same place throughout the entire battle. And it was only towards the end when some real movement started to happen. But I'm in a rather unique position now where I can actually dissect why I think we lost that fight. Part of it I think was a messy advance initially. I don't think that was really avoidable considering the situation, but if I could advance that again I would try and make it a little cleaner, I think. and try and position my units a little bit more advantageously, like maybe not have my bulldogs trapped up against the cliff where their buffs would not be affecting the maximum amount of units possible. As it was, that was rather limiting. Over by the lake as well, though, like I feel as though you do need to keep units in reserve in a situation like this. You can't just throw everything in brainlessly and expect that to go well for you, because it won't. Like, the enemy will be able to take advantage of that. But I do think Tundra maybe left too many units in reserve. Like, we were losing that fight over there. Like, my monsters were in there as a desperation measure. It wasn't because I thought I could break through. It was because, you know, there was nothing else over there. We needed more. And I feel as though a couple of units of his Ironshod Legionnaires and his Balrogs in there as well would have allowed us to, at least with our monsters, pull through and then hold with our line infantry over there. I think maybe he thought that I was trying to pull through with my monsters and do something like that. I wasn't. I was just desperately trying to hold the line there, as I was across most of the line, to be fair. You know, I was always intended to be just the first one in, taking most of the damage on the chin in melee and with their archers, with their initial volleys. And I did mostly accomplish that, but the fact that I have the most kills in this battle is actually not a good thing. You know, I was hoping that my allies would be able to do most of the damage in this fight, and in the end, it didn't work out that way. Maybe they would have done. You know, if the battle had worn on in the same fashion, I think particularly with stuff like the Ash Priests, if we had managed to maintain our cohesion without those cavalry charges, I think maybe my allies would have gotten more kills. But as it was, by that point, but to be honest, by the time the cavalry was rolling through the lines, my army was mostly gone. Like, I had already sort of expended what I had. And in the end, that was, I think, the key here. I think cohesion, you know, maybe being a little bit too conservative with some of our reserves. I wasn't able to get my crossbows into a good position to fire throughout the entire battle, whereas Tundra was. Little things like that added up. I mean, during the battle, J-Monster was sort of... He was very down on his side's chances when the Thrangshik Wolfborn charges came in. Looking back on this, though, I don't think they were actually, like... They weren't in that bad a position. Like, I think Scouts' assessment was more correct, where... Yes, they were bad, and yes, they gave the advantage to us in the fight, but it wasn't insurmountable, as this proves. I mean, the cavalry play was very good to bring them back from that brink, but I don't think their chances were dashed all that much by the Thrangshik Wolfborn charges. Like, they gave us the advantage, but it wasn't to the point where they were done for. So I think maybe, you know, jumping a little bit too soon on the conclusions there during the battle he was, looking back at this now. But it was a very close fight ultimately. We did gain the advantage with those charges, but we weren't able to keep it because of the good cav play from Feanor. And also the damage Doriath was able to do in melee was constant. Like, those shock infantry units were just able to just really put us into a corner pretty hard. So let's see what did the damage for both myself and Tundra. Bulldogs did very well on the side. My monstrous units didn't do as well as they could have done. I think in the case of the Valor Alcar, again, like I said, it was a desperate committal from them, really. The Troll Guard as well, initially I got them into some javelins, but then, you know, they were then set upon by line infantry, and it would have been more of a hassle to try and get them out of there than just leaving them there. I think the Troll Guard I probably should have pulled back, to be honest with you, but the Valor Alcar, if I'd done that, Doriath would have overwhelmed us. So, again, not great, but also a bit of a necessity for the Valor Alcar to do that. Wretches obviously did quite poorly. Spearguard of the Iron Crown did very well, and they did well on the front line as well, I would say. They held on to the middle. Even during the period of the battle where we were losing the middle, they were performing quite well. As were the Halberdiers obviously let me down a little bit with that break when they got charged by literally 3 heavy cavalrymen. But ultimately, they also were a good choice for this battle, I think, because it really helped us shore up that front line against the superior quality of the elves. My Reavers didn't do very well, to be honest, but then they did also get shot up early on. I think maybe I would have been better off going for the Legionnaires. I think they would have done marginally better. And those margins could have made the battle more in our favour. Ravagers, that shock infantry, did very well for me. Better than I thought they did, actually. During the battle, when I saw they got that many kills by the end, I was quite surprised. But it does go to show that shock infantry like that can be very good against more defensive, heavily armoured infantry of the likes of Feanor, as long as they're not getting shot up. But by far my best performers were my Uraloki. Like, my Uraloki over on this side, that was the one thing over on this side near the lake that our team had in our favour. The fact that my Uraloki were able to do a lot of damage to their infantry over here. Unfortunately, however, we weren't able to follow that up with a consistent push with a lot of numbers, and that was to our detriment in the end, I think. My Arbalists did okay, but I was never really able to get them into a really good position to fire along the lines for a consistent amount of time. Tundra, on the other hand, his Bulldogs did well. His Uraloki did okay as well, considering the situation they were in. Most of that was on cavalry, however, and the fact that we lost the battle because of cavalry means that ultimately, while it was a good amount of kills to get, considering the situation they were in. Ultimately, it wasn't decisive. Wolf Riders as well just got absolutely obliterated and overwhelmed. Ironshot Arbalest, his did much better than mine. His Ravagers had a fairly similar time to mine, so his Arbalest got into a better position than mine. And also towards the late game, when I still had my Arbalest left, obviously there was nothing to cover them from getting charged by Cav, so that was a problem for us. His Legionnaires, some of them did better, so again, that's a choice. That's a sign really that the Legionnaires were the right call instead of the Ravagers that I brought. Not the Ravagers, rather the Reavers, I should say. Lots of Wretches that didn't really do much other than die on the front line. His Troll Guard did marginally better than mine. They lasted a little bit longer, but ultimately not the level of kills you would want. Nor from his Valor Alcar either. So yeah, I mean, that was the story, I think. I think by the lake, we made some errors in what we committed and when we committed them. Along the line, we did well. I mean, to be fair, Artorias' Thrangshik charges were very decisive. But in the end, you got to give credit to the other team, I think, on this occasion. It was less what we did wrong. I think we could have played better on this occasion. But I think you have to give credit to Scouts and Iraqi for their cavalry play, because if they didn't do that at that point, we would have continued to work up the line, and ultimately I think the difference that they would have had to make up would have been insurmountable if they waited much longer. But in the end, very, very decisive indeed. Very close battle this, a very brutal battle here on the shores of the Lake TAUR FAROTH. At least I think that was the name of the battle, or map I should say. But yeah, a very enjoyable time once again. Obviously this battle was on stream, so some of you may well have seen it before, at least from afar, I'm sure. But this obviously in replay form. As for what's next, I mean, again, I'm not really sure. Like the 5k milestone is coming up, which has crapped up on me a little bit. I'm not really sure what I'm going to be doing about that still. I mean, a Q&A of some description will be happening, I'm certain. How to progress remains to be seen, I think. But yeah, with regards to replays, obviously that will continue as normal. The tier lists are just sort of something I'm going to be doing every now and then, I think. May very well be a couple of other things here and there as well. But again, I've never been terribly organised at running my schedule. The only thing I do is sort of make sure that I have something every 2 days with regards to a battle replay. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.